Welcome to Time Monk Radio. This is a Webbot forum group that's interviewing Clif High. My name is Sibel. I go by Green Meadow on the forum. And I have with me Disaster Cat, also Melody from Ireland. Say hi, Melody.
Hi everyone, welcome from Ireland.
And Amaranth, who's calling from Mexico. Say hi, Amaranth.
Hello, everybody.
There we are. Welcome to the Webbot forum interview, Cliff. You've been having fabulous bot hits lately. You've been, Trump and the confusion we've been having, and um, fractured politics and earthquakes in New Zealand. You've just been quite hot lately.
Thanks for noticing. Yeah, it has to do with being able to really effectively tune the lexicon. I stumbled onto some techniques about a year ago that I've been trying out. Before it was a little spotty because here's what would happen. Well, first off, let me explain what the hell that means. Um, I have a big list of words. To each of the words is attached a bunch of numeric descriptions, and these numeric descriptions include time parameters. And so, in tuning it, I would say make a forecast that we're going to have we're just making this up, we're going to have a Space Goat Farts episode of giant inflatable kitty cat get loose and terrorize Taiwan. All right, and it's going to show up in 4 months, and then something approximate that includes that language shows up 6 months later. Well, then 7 months out, I can tune those words that led to that 4 month part of that prediction, and then also or that forecast, and then also go to the predictive part of it, which was the actual description of the big giant kitty cat part. Sort of makes sense there?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
awesome.
so yeah, so in tuning, here's the problem though. You're trucking right along, you make a forecast and you say, okay, our big giant kitty cat's going to show up out there in 4 months, going to terrorize Taiwan. And then a multitude of things can occur, but in general, they would aggregate to something that could be along these lines. A giant kitty cat cartoon animal makes a big hit in the Japanese population 2 months ahead of that 4 month prediction. And you think, oh, there it is, it's manifest. And so when you tune the lexicon in the 3rd month, you bring all those words ahead. And then for the next 5 or 6 months, you're trying to play catch up because that Japanese instance was like a pre-temporal echo or a misdirection based on only one or two of the keywords, and you ended up with 7 or 8 of them actually 6 months out. So it gets really complicated. So as I say, about a year ago, I stumbled on a method that allows me to um, tune it in a fuzzy way. I'm dealing with set theory anyway, and I've made some breakthroughs in really good fuzzy set dynamics. It's a new approach to this. And so for those people that are fuzzy set programmers, it's as though you can take it and make it multi-dimensional in terms of the fuzziness. That will make sense to those people that deal with multi-dimensional arrays. In any event, though, this is what's led to the recent ability to tune it in a bit. Plus, I think that also everybody's getting bombarded with all the strange energies from space, and humans are actually leaking a lot more.
Well, that's kind of fascinating.
Well,
Uh,
we've had. Let me divert for a second. We've had some weird stuff occur. In June, we had the shift forward of all the Bitcoin stuff. The pattern matched exactly as to the forecast. It was just early, as I was saying, by a large number of weeks. And then it ended in July exactly as forecast, with Bitcoin not being in the 650s. But had we started that pattern that was forecast at the appropriate time forecast, we would have left July with Bitcoin on the way up, and then we would have worked our way back down and so on over the course of August and September and been in an entirely different space now. And so something caused this pattern of forecast to shift forward, and I was able to catch that. And I advanced that, just dialed it in with this fuzzy set stuff, and lo and behold, we got the pretty good summer forecast into fall. Again, sort of makes sense.
it's your technology, so I get an idea, but
Oh, okay.
That's
All
about
right.
as far
Okay.
as I get.
Okay. It's a very difficult subject to get your head wrapped around, but basically my before I'd been tuning the lexicon in sort of a manual way, if you want to think about it, replacing values and all these words. And then about a year ago I started noodling with the idea of taking it easy on my poor old brain and came up with a way that isn't automated, but it's more adaptive and sort of self-governing to a certain extent. And so that's aided me in not stepping too ahead of myself or too late in tuning the lexicon for particular sets of words.
Well, it sounds like we have very eventful time coming up, so um, having more detail like you're doing would be awesome. Because just figuring our way through the next couple of years sounds like that's going to be a new experience.
Let's expand that out to about the next 12 years.
Oh
Yeah,
God. Okay.
we really
Um,
do have to think of ourselves in a historical analog to the period of time of the Soviet Union breaking up.
well, well. So one of the things you'd said is we would be in a state of confusion after the election. Um, is the confusion, is it that continues? Is that just about the election, or is there other things coming in that's going to create confusion?
We amplify okay, so here's the way it works. The confusion data set was dominant from a particular point on as supporting sets feed into the scatter graph that supports that dominant set. And so confusion rides, so to speak, a growing wave of supporting sets. Within the supporting sets, you can drill down and say, aha, this adds to the general confusion here. This adds to it over there. This adds to the general confusion feeling by its impact on this particular population base. And so we get a sort of we can get a mental image of like a 1950s propaganda poster where it's showing all the particular subset groups of the United States and where representative images popping up out of a map of the U.S. And what we're able to do is to say, okay, there's a general tone of confusion over all of them, and if we drill down, we can find out how and why they're being affected in these various ways. So just today we had another aspect of that appear that's going to be adding confusion to an entirely different group at the moment. And I'll go into that in a second. But the confusion is going to grow as a dominating theme, at least out so far as into March within the new data sets. The whys of the confusion start with, all of the people saying, why did we lose? And then there's the other part saying, why did we win? And then there's everybody saying, why did we trust the media? And then there's in the media saying, why did I get fired? All of this kind of thing. And so all of these levels of confusion are there. But we also have, as you were discussing, another layer of confusion, which is the economics of it all. And then there's a further layer that's underneath all of this that is impacting everything. And we see an example of it in the recent failure of mainstream media to advance the agenda that they clearly all had. 97% of all of the media gave their money to Clinton, and all of the media stories, there was a preponderance of favorability to Clinton by a huge amount. And so it was agenda driven, whether it was intended to or not, or whether it was simply the side effect of everybody being in their own little insulative bubbles and the feeding of those bubbles by the algorithms that support our lives. So let's stop for a second and consider that what you see on Facebook and any of the social media is fed by an algorithm that wants you to feed you more of the same because you've requested or looked at something that had to do with ice cream. You're going to see ice cream ads until hell freezes over or until you do something to actively shake that out of the algorithm that's then associated it with you. So as you do this, as you drill down into information, we have a tendency to what we call cone. And that is to say that as you start off entering social media, they present every possible thing they can think of. But the longer you are on there, the amount of variance that they provide to what they present you diminishes over time until you end up spiraling in on a cone, so to speak, very much like you're inside a tornado dropping down into its hard little part at the bottom. And so you lose that divergence of opinion that you had initially. And you're unaware of it because it's subtle and also because it's computer supported. And we have a tendency to do that kind of thing. It's called confirmation bias in our minds even before computers came around. And so this kind of thing all that, leads to the confusion as to why reality didn't work out the way our cones suggested that it should. And so that level of coning in has impacted and is impacting the information sources that form the cone themselves. As it's a difficult subject to get the idea across, but here's basically the idea. As the various agencies within the government lie in order to promote their own agenda and put out fake numbers that promote their own individual sub-agency agenda, all of those lies and fake numbers add up, and people that are up the food chain make decisions on those numbers thinking, oh, I'm in the only layer that's lying about the numbers. We know the real numbers that are coming up to us, and we're just exaggerating them to make do for our stuff. Maybe some of them are sharp enough to say, well, I know that these are all inflated numbers, but for my own purposes, I'm going to inflate them even further. In any event, we get all of these numbers that, again, within the government, so sort of go to the idea of coning in or a confirmation bias that it becomes self-feeding. And then once you're in it, you don't know that you're in it until something like this happens, the big upside the head slap with reality. And that's where the confusion comes in. We're seeing that now also in the data sets as I say, all the way out through March. But what's going to take over is the confusion within the financial system that will also roll out into the economic and then into the fiscal systems that will result from an inability of people to understand what's going on within the bond market. And the first examples of this that we'll have should appear, according to the data sets, sometime before December 12th. And that emotional impact of these things appearing will ripple out, and we'll be all living with that emotional impact in late January through February. Again, I have a few more dates that are, sort of like emotionally hot dates, but I don't have exact dates for anything to occur, nor have I gotten into that level of the data sets at this point.
So do the elite are confused by what the political outcome, and now it sounds like they're going to be confused by the financial outcome.
We're
Do
all
they have?
sort of confused too. It
Yeah,
goes deep. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Um, Amaranth has the next question.
Okay, and I think it fits in well with what you discussed there, Cliff,
Hmm.
because the next little bit that we want to discuss or talk around is the entrainment technology. And I think a lot of the confusion might well be this technology breaking down, but I don't know. We had questions around that technology, and we wanted to know the technology, the entrainment technology. Could it be as bad as a physical frequency that's coming across televisions in some way or another, or like just a hypnotic repetition of memes, or
Both of those, but yes, yeah.
both of those? Yeah. And the forum member that asked this question asked further, what makes people susceptible to it? I mean, we were all sitting, when you started talking about the entrainment technology, we were all sitting thinking, oh heavens, are we entrained? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Cliff?
Sure. I want to return, by the way, back to the pyramid in our previous subject in a minute and the confusion. Okay, but the entrainment technology is really it's sort of fascinating. They've been developing it easily since the 40s, if not earlier. There's a lot to suggest that Sigmund Freud um, Shlomo, when he was writing there back in the 20s in 1920s, was really the big piggyback point from which the idea of mind control or entrainment technology, as they call it today, took off. And the idea is as follows. Humans have a natural susceptibility to this, and you can test it on yourself. If you work in an office, when you go into the office tomorrow, pick out somebody whose countenance shows that they're somewhat glum, or
Oh
they're
heavens, I
having a
don't know if
bad
we
hair
want to
day,
do that.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
and you go to these people and you reverse it. You say, man, I can really see it coming out of you today. You're having a big key day. Don't you look good? That kind of thing, right? You can actually entrain them and change their state of mind. Okay, so government and the powers that be know that this is feasible. We do it all the time, and what they've done is to advance it to something more of a scientific art, and some of that includes this subliminals, which are very powerful. But on top of that, now we have subliminals that are more than just visual. We've got an alpha carrier wave signal that can be pumped out through the electronic media that is not just television. It's anything that runs at the 1080i frequency. So if you got a really good cell phone, it'll also get you there if you're not aware of it. What is shocking, it turns out, when confusing to the powers that be, was how the population fractured out. So, in other words, they assumed by their own cocooning into their little cones of information that their numbers were accurate because of certain indicators that they thought they had seen, and they were misinterpreting what was going on. And the indicators seemed to suggest that the entrainment technology was going to be better than 60% of the general population and would certainly be better than 70% of the voting population. And so they thought they would have a real effective tool here. And you're correct, they actually shut it off as near as I can tell. And that's why we had this hard crash for so many people that were entrained to a very particular vision, and then they ran into reality. So this is very much the same that we see with the explosions of large cults, the that sort of same kind of an effect where everybody's walking around dazed and in sort of, okay, what happened here? Why, why aren't we where we should be? Because everybody was involved with it. All the energy and key was straightforward. It was never allowed to be anything else. You see this with people that are extracted from, abusive religions where it's hugely mind control, and they suffer the same kind of an effect. Now we're seeing it with quite a number of people and no support system to catch them. And so they're somewhat vulnerable to being reused should that sort of arise, if someone wanted to do it. But that's really what we're looking at is an alpha carrier wave that pumps up the signals that are coming through both visually and through the auditory channels. And there's probably more than what you're able to hear. So the alpha wave signal puts you into a receptive state. It can be maintained. You feel good when you're listening to it. You feel tremendous when you're sharing the vision with others. There's this feedback loop that touches all of the those. Sorry, I can't think of the name of them at the moment, but those points in the brain that are producers of the natural opiates of the brain. So you get a really good glow from all of this. And that when that was removed, a lot of people actually crashed. And it was, if you look at it, it's like you were watching a lot of people, that had some bad drugs at a rave.
Yeah, yeah. So to kind of get out of that entrained state, it's basically turn it off.
I think that there are, and I'm going to be doing a big, or not a big, but for me, a lot of work in a video about this subject. But I think there's a little bit more to it, and it's more easily defeated at other levels if one examines what's going on. And so, for instance, I'm pretty sure that one could defeat the technology through diet and through appropriate water management. That is to say, keeping yourself not dehydrated, that you're all plumped up and your cells are hydrated and everything's functioning. There's things you can do at a physical level that I think make the entrainment technology far less powerful within the particular mind whose body is in that particular state.
Yeah, that's good news. That's good news.
And yeah,
Okay, let's
probably
step off. Yeah.
by the way, probably wearing the if you could get hold of it, real tin foil probably would help because there's these things out there called Gwen towers, and we're all subject to
Yeah.
huge amounts of electromagnetic pollution now. So I'm certain that the carrier waves are also being broadcast out within that part of our matrix, and so just walking around, you're going to be subjected to it.
Yeah, look, I'd rather drink good water than wear a tinfoil hat. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
Okay,
same here.
let's step off here and hand over to, I think Disaster Cat is going to take it from me here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Cliff, the next question is post-election, the U.S. is starting to look more like countries experiencing a color revolution. It looks to us, particularly people outside, that the United States is becoming very divided and angry. Family and friends aren't speaking to each other. I see that on Facebook, people unfriending themselves because who they voted for. How much of this conflict is really genuine, and how much is being just encouraged to destabilize the country? And if that's happening, who benefits from the country being destabilized?
The latter, I don't know because that goes to intent. I know that, for instance, some of the minions along the way, anybody at the head of the purple, like the Clintons with their new purple suits, obviously stand to benefit. The question about how much of it is genuine or legitimate, I've got to say it's probably 100%, although the outcome and the bad behavior and so on, I think, is actually being simply, I think that's the component that's being manipulated. So through the entrainment technology, good, bad, or indifferent, in the sense that the coning tends to provide us with walls. So even those people that are not voters that just didn't want to hear anything about it, they put walls around themselves, and they are actually sort of violently anti-voters, if you see what I'm saying. And so they're actually adding to the negative angst that everybody's got as a result of this. Now, how much of it is augmented by our situation at the moment within the media and the technology is difficult to say because, see, here's the problem. At its core, this all of the bad feelings, all of the fierce tendency to fight this thing through to the end kind of a deal, and the emotional levels involved, uh, admittedly augmented by the media, admittedly pumped up by technologies we cannot ascertain its total effect of, all resolve down to bad money, though. Everybody is aware of how bad the situation is in spite, and even if they're not admitting it to themselves, even if they're not acknowledging it, even if they're not speaking of it, if they read no literature about it, if their cone is so tightly screwed down that they're living in the bubble world created by the media or one of their own, they nonetheless feel in their interaction with the rest of the reality that something is not right. And that goes all the way down to the money as we are becoming basically unglued from the empire of the dollar. If you go and you read history, if you read like any of the writers in Rome at the time of the degradation of the denarius, when people bitched about it, you'll see that within the next 200 years, we have what we here call the fall of the Roman Empire. And all of the writers along that period of time could be millennials. If you're reading what they're talking about when these men in Rome were in their 20s and 30s, it's the same language that you see now in all of the uh, uh, video blogs and regular blogs, absent the social justice component. But nonetheless, there was even sort of a hint of that at the time, and that was even, about the slave system in Rome and getting rid of it and all of that sort of thing. Again, a component driven by the degradation of the money. It was getting harder and harder to support slaves, and they weren't providing as much benefit for the basically a point of negative returns. And you see that with all of the millennials too.
So do you see any like states in the US actually leaving the Union or succeeding or a civil war or anything like that?
Uh, okay, so again, we have a very top level set of contention, and we have all kinds of supporting sets underneath that forecast language. So as of this particular point in analyzing any of the language going forward, we don't have anything that says that there is a successful move in that direction over these next 18 months. Now, that's the inner level of the long-term data. Beyond that, you don't ever have enough details to know if it's which way you're interpreting it. So, indeed, we may have language that says, California succeeds, but if it's out there only in long-term data, it's like, okay, but that might just be we're only getting part of the headline about the California vote failed. but we just didn't get that component of it because the language was so much built up around the idea of California succeeding. So at this stage, no, we don't have anything that shows that. There's nothing that shows a civil war. There's a whole lot of stuff about continuing confusion through the period through March of next year. And then we get into hyperinflation. There's a whole lot of, let me put it to you this way as well. As we've gotten into this period, probably since, let's say, March or April of this year, we've had a huge amount of disproportionate shift of the data down into immediacy data. I understand why this is going on, but it's made things a little bit more difficult because now the model space has a tendency to be dominated by large amounts of detail. So it's kind of like you got to paw through it to get at some of the larger themes that will carry forward. So there's huge amounts of emotional interactions and shifts in the emotional tone that are going to be occurring from December all the way through March that have a tendency to obscure those kind of things that may be occurring then that are going to cause problems further down in the year. But so far over the year, insofar as the data has laid itself out, we have a number of big issues that are going to cause language to fracture, but it's basic. It's a over the next 18 months. So 2017 and into some portion of 2018 is the period in which it unravels. So I really actually don't expect to see a lot of solutions, so to speak, emerge until we get some portion of the way into that. Make sense? California
Yeah.
isn't going to split, actually. You're not going to get enough people to go, or Texas, until the economy gets that much worse.
Okay. Well, the other question that was submitted, and this is really a two-part question, but do you think Trump will make it to the inauguration, or will there be more surprises? And if he does, was he selected to be a patsy to blame for the coming economic crisis or the coming economic problems, or is just coincidence, basically?
No, he's not. They may have decided that they were going to select him. In fact, from all appearances, Hillary wanted to run against him. But Trump, if he had had a heart attack and not made it into the primary, even there would have been another Trump-like being to emerge because he's just simply the man of his. He's a man of the times, or he fits with the times and he's riding that particular wave. So we don't have anything that suggests that he won't get inaugurated. There's a lot of stuff that suggests that there's mass amounts of confusion as the shift of power tries to actually occur, and that the shift of power from the let's just call them the club into the new hands in January, February, and March is amidst a very confusing time anyway. And from our viewpoint as USA population citizens, it's going to exacerbate the hell out of it all. We won't be able to tell whether it's politically caused confusion or the dollar dying kind of confusion. But it's going to be just chaotic.
Wow. Okay, something to not exactly look forward to. I think Amaris had the next question.
No, Sibel has the next question.
Sibel, sorry about that, Sibel.
So this is going to the economics. You're talking about economic turmoil and debt deflation. So just to try and get a picture of what we're looking towards, can you compare it to like Venezuela or Japan or the Soviet Union? How will we echo what they've done or be different than their scenarios?
It's probably going to be something more like, at least initially, something that's going on in India now, or what I witnessed in France in the 60s. There's some suggestion that comes through the data that the powers that be recognize that a shift has to be made, at least internally, to how they manage the dollar. And so there may be an attempt. Okay, so let's stop and say the powers that be recognize the dollar's dying. They can't keep it going forever. They want to keep power, so they're trying to engineer a replacement. In doing so, they're following a model that was used in the de Gaulle era in France to try and do the same things that occurred that are occurring right now in India. And that is they're trying to get tax revenue up so they'll have more money to play with, reduce competing corruption to the government, which is to say tax avoidance and people just telling government to go to hell, and to get a greater control over all their citizens by registering them into the tax system. Now, in India, it's thought that less than 1% of the populace pays tax, and now so they needed to get that up. Why did they need to get it up at this time? Well, it turns out that there's been a big move in the UN, which is our New World Order spokes area, to get into a world tax situation, and you can't tax if you can't control and record their movements with money. And so we're seeing this situation emerge in India now, where if you have legitimate money earned honorably and everything, it still takes you 2 hours to take these old notes and go through the process of getting them converted to new notes, and you're only allowed to do $60 in a day. So the whole country is shut down. The way they've shut down is such that anybody that's young enough is standing in lines for people that are too old that are trying to convert the money. You fill out the paperwork, give it to somebody with bigger, stronger legs, and let them walk through the process and give them a piece of the action. And these guys are making more that way than they would if they were working. So the whole country's upended. This is exactly the same kind of a pattern that I observed as a kid when I saw the French go through it. There's suggestion that, what's he call it? Scheiss, as in German for shit. There's a suggestion that the Scheiss dollar will emerge, a new internal to be used only in the United States dollar. And they'll try and do a dollar for dollar swap, and in the process, or excuse me, a new for old swap that will in the process reduce the amount of actual dollars in circulation, because in order to get the new one, you'll have to take a large percentage of it electronically. And that's going to be the proffered solution. There's some suggestions in the data that indeed there's a scheme that would fit that description that's being planned for the USA POP. So you can see that we're going to go into a period of confusion that's going to be economic, that's going to be uh, um, unlike the White Revolution in Russia or in the Soviet Union that led to the formation of Russia. It's unlike that because there's not a large number of wedges trying to drive apart the separate states at this particular point, as there was in the old Soviet Union. And at this point, there's actually more cohesive glue for the states to stay together, more reasons to stay together than to break apart. But nonetheless, we're going to go through this period of time where the powers that be are going to be offering us solutions to the economic woes, and those powers that be are going to now have to get them through the new administration, which they'll control as they've controlled all of them. And this is going to lead us to our period of economic confusion going forward into 2017. It's really interesting as you watch these larger themes at work, such as the idea of a global tax. And then instead of paying taxes to your local sovereign government, you would pay them to a UN that would then feed them back out the way the federal government feeds them back out to the various different states. And the level of control of that is just huge. And at the same time, you can sit here in the United States and say, nope, that ain't going to happen. that cannot work. And there's just so many reasons it can't work. And the individual that we've got there dealing with them now, the whole Trump phenomenon kind of a thing is simply, it could have been named after whoever would have replaced him, but the phenomenon is there. It's a level of populism that reflects in terms of its language exactly what occurred in 1918. And I think if we wanted to take a more accurate model of what might happen here in the United States, we could sort of take India today and try and lay it on top of United States from 1918 to 1926. And you'll see that there's going to be levels of conflict as they attempt at the top to force us to go through a model that the populace at the moment doesn't want to have anything to do with. And so that level of chaos is coming to us. I'm not suggesting that everybody run out and get cash, because at any given moment, they can just decide, as they did in India, hey, none of those green monies, no money issued before any day, issued before today is good. And in order to, have a good U.S. dollar, our new U.S. Der Scheiss dollar, it's got to be this baby blue. And so you're going to have baby blue dollars. So if you've got old green dollars, red dollars, whatever colors, you got to bring them in and swap them. And oh, by the way, maybe we'll give you one for each one of your 5 old dollars. And that can be done at their whim. So the idea of saving currency and stuff makes no sense. And that's what really ticked off the people in France who were anti-tax at the time, because in the 60s it was estimated that only 4% of the people actually paid income tax in France. Now I think it's as high as 11 or 12%.
Well, in America, we're so tracked and taxed. I mean, they know where our cell phone is, they know how we spend our money on our debit card. So, would the main point then just be to be reducing cash circulation?
Yeah, there's 2 points there. Yes, they have you're quite correct. Every person can be tracked down to the individual movements, but at some point you have to understand that's drowning in data. Finding any meaningful information out of that involves many, many, many people to track one individual. What I really liked with the movies about that guy, Jason Bourne, those movies. Here was this guy, admittedly educated by the CIA, but it showed how labor intensive it was for the government to be fascist in the day of our current technology. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in the CIA's, representation in the movie attempting to come to grips with this guy. And this guy admittedly knew things, but it's not that difficult to get a book and learn how to disappear and cause these people all no end of trouble because they assume that your cell phone has the geolocation turned on. Those are real easy to disable. They assume all of this stuff that, basically you're going to be on the grid and it's real easy to drop off the grid. And then finding you becomes a real huge task, as we see illustrated there. So they're in a situation where fundamentally the numbers are that they cannot win. And even the Chinese recognize this. The Chinese' greatest fear, by the way, is an economic conditions that will cause the fracturing of their society and lead to a civil war there. And we're actually here in the United States much more vulnerable to a Chinese civil war, I think, than we are to one within our own borders. And that will have to do a lot with the breakdown of the just-in-time supply system and the way the money's going to go and the pressure it's going to put on government. And government, by the way, is not really necessarily forward-looking or acting. They're usually reactive. And so by the time government gets around to doing anything about it, the crisis has been solved by the local community, usually, if the government doesn't interfere, and they're on to something else. So we're into that level of degrading empire, if you will, and uh, where you are and the conditions you're going to be in are going to be fine for perhaps a little bit, and then wonky for a while, and then you move over a state and it seems fine, and so we're just into this period of um, I want to say the new normal finally breaking down. It has to do again though with the same kind of things that occurred with the Roman Empire and all these other currencies as they've degraded.
Yeah. Well, in India, I heard that 86% of the cash was made invalid. And
And
I can't
yeah,
imagine how you do transactions.
well, you don't, and
Would
that's
would
that.
stop all transactions pretty much.
It pretty much has. Now, of course, admittedly, their transaction base was at a smaller level in terms of what we would think of as microtransactions. You're not spending $5 to $9 for lunch every day, that sort of thing. So, what we would think of as microtransactions, but that 86% disappearance or made illegal of those particular notes has hugely impacted. And that's just the kind of thing we saw in France. And in France, they were months in rioting, months of discontent, 2 years of a social unrest. And in India, because of the size of the population and the numbers involved, I actually think that they may risk um, getting to the point where it snowballs beyond the ability of the governmental bodies to control at all. So they may not be able to undo what's going on now. For instance, here's a quick scenario. Say that they go 2 or 3 more weeks down the road, and you've got takes you 2 hours to get $60 per person per day, and the whole country is ground to a halt, and barely anything is going along. And the economic impact of sucking 2 hours out of everybody's day just to get this kind of money becomes apparent to government, and they decide they're going to react and okay, we've had enough, we're going to undo it. That would be the worst possible thing they could do. Absolutely create vast quantities of chaos because it would, in one fell swoop, sever any idea of confidence in currency because you would recognize, wait a second, now they're saying we can use these notes. and instantly it's all gone, and then the rush into gold, silver, and anything of value would be at a level that these people could not even imagine, even based on what they're seeing now. And I've heard anecdotally from reliable sources that are on the scene there, that are in the business of moving metals from around India legally. You know, they're legal salespeople at supporting the jewelry industry. That it's chaotic. That some of the larger areas have got multi-hour lines just to be admitted to jewelry stores, just to be able to turn over some of the money to buy gold. And now on the wholesale end, there's something of a conundrum. Do they or do they not accept cash for gold? The wholesale guys are starting to think no, they only want to deal electronically because they don't want to be caught holding vast quantities of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes.
Yeah, yeah. So back to the U.S. We've got you had in the reports for quite a while about seniors mobbing and rioting, and so seniors' money can be in 401ks, it can be in stocks, pension funds, Social Security. How will these different sources fare?
We don't. The picture we have, I can't really determine that. I can make a guess, okay? Because the picture we have shows the descriptions appear in spring. The descriptions of what's going on are, if you will, in a background that suggests spring-like weather. That is to say, you know, there's not a lot of ancillary words about heavy coats or the seniors being slowed down by winter weather or any of that kind of thing. So I'm anticipating it's all going to occur around in spring as part of the confusion and confrontation that develops. And it appears as though we're not looking at that many banking facilities. So here's the thing. The mobs descriptions that we've had in the data are all pretty much going, let's say 90% of those are going to the idea of people within government offices. This would have a tendency to suggest that we're talking about Social Security and other government funded programs as being very significantly impacted, to the point that it got people off their couch and into the office to try and remedy a situation that was affecting them personally. There's also a certain amount of um, focus within those same data sets towards the ephemeral forms of protest, which is to say people that ran into problems accessing funds electronically. That covers such a huge area that I'm not able to isolate whether we're talking about you know, some kind of a trading account or a retirement payment that isn't made that should have been deposited electronically, or you know, even a Social Security check that should have been deposited electronically. So there's a certain amount of overlap to that, but in the electronic part of it not working is what motivates a lot of these people into the government offices. There's about maybe 10% of the overall data sets that are talking about people in non-government offices that are describing situations where they're dealing with a commercial operation, that actually these guys are much more brutal than the fellows in the government. So it's going to be rather chaotic, and we'll see this language, I think, in March or so. It's going to have an impact, of course, from that point forward. So I think of that as one of the things that I hate to use the term now that we brought up the Purple Revolution stuff, but I think of that as coloring the tone of the rest of the year. That is to say that, you know, early in the year, in March, we have these uh, very disconcerting scenes show up through media about, you know, covering all of these people responding to the sudden crushing of their economic world.
Yeah, I could see certainly, pensions and stocks and those things being more vulnerable than Social Security because, like, food stamps and Social Security can keep people at a bare minimum.
There's issues there though. Yes, you're correct, but they don't mail out Social Security anymore, and they don't mail out
That's
food
true.
stamps. So those are run by a couple of the big banks. Once the big banks start going into major hyper freak out mode, a lot of their services are going to fail, and that's going to leave a lot of people high and dry just on that part of the infrastructure failure alone. Even if there was no let's call it active decision to shut off money. And I don't even know that it's that. The data sets would not tend to support an interpretation that the government decides to shut off Social Security. Rather, what would seem to be occurring, and that we're in it right now, comes to me, and I have to give credit to Jim Sinclair and Bill Holter because of their analysis of my work and their own sources. They describe it as a currency event. And so they go into some we went into it yesterday, but eventually it boils down to this, that the interest rate stuff or whatever it's going to occur before around early December that carries over into the next year is going to cause a currency event that has an analog in what happened when Reagan was inaugurated. So Reagan gets inaugurated, and then we have a rush into gold as the money dies, and they had to bring in Paul Volcker, who had to put on his I'm the head Nazi boots, walk around and basically bitch slap everybody with 17 to 20% interest rates in a very short period of time to try and save the dollar. We're at an analog of that period that's multiplied by the size of the debt, the amount of people, the modern communications, etc. So it will be much more confusing. It will require those same kind of personalities probably multiplied by 10, and I don't know that we'll get those. And the results or potential is much more magnified as well in terms of how that's going to occur. So you could find within a very short period of time that even though they're issuing Social Security checks, they become relatively meaningless. By that, I don't know how much of a devaluation might occur, but we've already seen in some places in India where people are so desperate to deal with their currency that they can't legally trade that they're willing to take a 75% haircut to get new bills for old. And that was similar to what we saw in France with illegal money. So under those circumstances, you're basically having money chaos. And in that kind of an environment, the idea that all of a sudden the terrible things you buy, the fizzy drinks are up 5 times in cost, that sort of thing happens extremely rapidly. So I can see that. I can see Social Security people reacting as a result of that kind of a thing occurring over these next 4 months.
Yeah, they would. Thank you. Melody's up next.
Yeah, Cliff, in this question, we go back to the other generation, the other direction. And the question is, Strauss and Howie popularized the idea of regular generational shifts in their book, The Fourth Turning. Now, they said that the fourth turning, or the crisis period, would last from about 2005 to 2025. Similar situations prior fourth turnings they flagged in the U.S. would be the Civil War, the war between the states, a combination of the Great Depression and World War II, among others. Now, the millennial generation of this cycle would normally be labeled the hero archetype using their theory. But many so far see them as the snowflake generation. What are the challenges that particularly the long-term data, the short-term data, are playing for the millennials, and how do you see them rising or falling to the challenges they're going to have to beat?
Well, the data sets are saying they've really got it. It really is a super series of challenges for them. And the idea of being in a template like that is accurate. So will they fail? I don't know. As a generation, those are composed of, hundreds of millions of individuals. And so we have a long way to go to see if we can make that kind of a decision. Now, there's a lot to suggest that indeed they're going to be dynamically responding to the challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll be smart enough to rise above it and get their personal lives in order and be contributing, or as opposed to simply adding to the noise. So let's deal with a couple of issues with the noise right there. We do not have the demographics that support turning the millennial generation into another cultural revolution like they did in China. That may be the intent with the Soros guys. That goes to the why issue and the intent. I don't know why they would do such a thing, but there are indeed signs of that. But the demographics don't support it. And then also, the poor generation has come up through the schooling that has led them to the inability to accept things in a brutally real world that's getting more brutal by the day. And so I think actually that uh, it's harsh to say it this way, But Universe obviously wanted it this way because it allowed the school system to not prepare these people. And so it wanted to take a whole generation here in the USA pop, put them into a school system that coddled them all of their lives, such that by the time they became young adults, they had had no experience with any form of, with building character or revealing their character to deal with negative circumstances. And then Universe is going to slap them with the hardest negative circumstances that we've seen in perhaps, let's say, 7 or 8 generations. So that provides a very unique opportunity because unlike a generation where you had a really good role model of your father dealing with adversity, such that you would tend to adopt, whether you were male or female, the characteristics and try and emulate those characteristics. This generation doesn't have that, so that they don't have those inbuilt constraints about how they're going to react and what they're going to do. So we will probably find absolutely new stuff emerging simply because these people won't have the role models to constrain them. But on the other side of it, a great many of them at an individual level will probably not meet the challenges that are heading to them, and it may be that a great many of them that percentage is a little larger than might otherwise have had to be had the schooling prepared them for it. It didn't toughen anybody up, you know. So when the what's that phrase, when it gets tough, the tough get going. Well, it's getting tough, and so far we're not seeing a lot of the tough emerge out of that particular generation. I think we will simply because there's a lot of those people that, when it comes to it, are going to say, "No, I'm going to survive. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to survive," because they're going to recognize that at some point that the illusion that they'd been presented in school does not exist. The state isn't going to pull them out of any of this. They're class affiliations, their cultural affiliations are not going to pull them out individually. We're born alone and we die alone, and somewhere along the way, you've got to recognize that your success is entirely personal, as is your failure. Whether or not these individuals stand up and say, I'm willing to accept personal responsibility and get on with it, that we're about to see. But it's really nice of Universe, by the way, to come along and provide them with some really cool stuff to challenge just that.
I was going to say my understanding of generational theory, and I've been reading it for quite a while, is that what their theory is that the circumstances allow certain types of personalities or certain types of people to come to the forefront who might not otherwise make such an impression. And I think that goes along very well with what you're saying, is that this whole generation is being given this opportunity that will force some of them possibly into heroic acts. I don't think it means that a hero generation is really any more or less heroic, but things happen like World War II or the Great Depression that forced them into acting that way.
Correct. And
Some
we're
of them.
about to, you're absolutely correct. And so we're about to see what it is Universe is going to provide. I'm quite hopeful now that it will not be providing the challenge of intercontinental ballistic nuclear war.
Thank you. That's good to know. I think next is Amaranth this time. Am I right? Yes.
Okay, Cliff. I have
Yeah.
2 questions, and they're very, very different. And the first one I'm reading from the forum, and the question is, what is it, 21? Yeah. How will the IRS and the tax system be affected by the coming years?
Initially, we still have building in the data sets for the tax revolt here in USA Pop. That's going to be visible to in the media in March and April of this year, and it's going to continue on as a boiling pot all through 2017. We don't have data that gives me a good feeling about the institution. We don't have any data whatsoever to support a peaceful or nice resolution to the issues that will be resolved or will be brought up in March. So there are data sets that show that the IRS is going to be a pain in the ass to the incoming political people because of whatever it is that comes out January and February that leads to the population decided, okay, I've had enough of this stuff in March and April.
Okay, I hope that helps the USA Pop people on the forum. Let me move over to what would probably be the last question in this hour. The topic is thinking and destiny. Okay.
Sure.
Do you still think that that is the best description of a soul path that we have for ourselves to study and think about.
I think that that is
Um,
the very best possible way to describe it, okay? That my
yes,
thinking of this is that we this is currently the best description that we have. There are areas in the book that I disagree with, that I have personal experiential knowledge that tells me that his wording, as much as he tried to be precise, is no longer adequate or compatible with our context for those words. So, for instance, in Thinking in Destiny, you'll find that Percival makes mention of animals in a way that does not actually reflect the way that animals fit into the overall scheme. His mentioning
yes,
them,
yes. I saw that. Yeah, yeah.
okay, and
That
the
was
language he
that
uses
was a chapter
reflects
that bothered me.
correct. Now, the
Yeah, that
language he
bothered
uses
me. Yeah.
the language he uses there reflects the attitude of his life in the 20s and 30s. So that is an area where uh, his attempt to screen out those impacts on his personality did not succeed. Now, um, uh, today, I don't know that uh, if he were writing that book today, I doubt that he would take that approach to describing what is going on. So I think that this is really the best possible description. Thinking in Destiny is the very best possible description, but there's holes in it. Bear in mind that this is a situation where every single being that writes on this subject, uh, all the way back into ancient history and all the way forward into the distant future, will always be writing as a self-taught person. And so, as a self taught person right now, in the more mundane world of technology or any other things that I've had to teach myself, I recognize that I have huge damn holes that, from an academic viewpoint, I don't get
Yeah,
necessarily the
yeah.
good spread across background. And so, I think thinking in Destiny as a self taught kind of person in this realm. And now, bear in mind as well that this is a very, very difficult thing to put into words. Experientially, I have gone through episodes that I know that validate what is in much of the first parts of the book. Let's say the first, I don't know, 600 pages. A lot of that material I have can validate and say that I personally know this to be factual, and I also am in the same mind set in terms of how he describes some of this. There's areas in there that I disagree with him, and I say no, I would not interpret it that way because my experience, of course, is different. It's been advanced into the complexity of the pulse here by the number of years that separate his death from my birth, etc., and from our talking about it. But in the main, as a guide, I don't think you can do better. Now, I also think it really helps to go and pick up Patanjali's book on the Yoga Sutras and read about the Purusa and read about the stuff that he talks in there and see where the holes he's describing he's actually filling in. So it may make a lot of sense to read the science of yoga and read it as rapidly and quickly as you can so that you don't get trapped into the um, initiatory process that is inbuilt in that book, and then go back and read his talk about it. And you're able to say, "Aha, he is quite correct."
Yes, yes. But it's difficult material for most people. It took me a year to read that book. Okay, and I'm a pretty fast
Which
reader. That
Thinking in Destiny. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand.
yeah,
The
yeah,
Science of Yoga I've been reading for over 30 years.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you dive into the Vedas, and if you go to the real Vedas, that's a whole other
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
But
I
thanks for that,
probably
Cliff.
won't live that
Thanks
long.
for that. Yeah, I know. Well, thanks for that. I'm going to squeeze in one more question here
Sure.
because I'm telling you, our list has been decimated. We had such long list of questions. Cliff, where is Julian Assange?
I I don't have information I can share on personalities because I don't trust it. Okay, those areas that I do trust have a tendency to concentrate the negative. My interpretations of that are based on my particular appreciation of the context of that negative. So I cannot say that. I mean, I just don't know. I get weird information. Sometimes I trust, and then this is an area where it's so easily polluted. I'm just going to stay away from. Much easier, for instance, to talk about what's going on in Antarctica with the pyramids showing up, the fact that the John Kerry was down there, and that the Pope of the Eastern Church, as well as the excuse me, the Pope of the Catholics was down in Antarctica. So some big stuff is going down there. Julian Assange, it's
Yeah.
personalities. And also,
Okay. That
by the way,
is.
thinking and
Uh-huh.
destiny pointedly ahead of that question. His destiny, we know where it leads.
Yes. Yes, we do. We do. Okay. Sibel, over to you to bring it in.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Cliff. That's we're trying
I
to get.
can go a little longer if you want. If you want to take a few more, I can give you another half hour.
Oh, awesome. Wonderful. I would love that. Do you have
Wonderful.
any word on the water protectors movement? They're the ones that have been fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah, I have data sets that forecast certain outcomes there, and this is part of the confusion. Okay, let me see if I can set it as a background. Um, the winter's going to come on in and push the parties apart and dampen down confrontation such that it will go, according to the data sets, go into like a hiatus that'll go over December and the early part of January and into February. And then we have a whole lot of stuff that seems to be like an early spring blossoming that comes out in February. Some of this stuff, almost all of it seems to appear beyond the 24th of January. That's when the scattergraph starts getting filled, so to speak. The balloon starts getting enlarged. And so at that point, we have the pipeline issue come back up, along with some other energy issues. Now, we have to also look at what's going to be happening within the framework of the management structure in Washington, D.C. at the time, because the data sets are forecasting that the pipeline issues and that confrontation are going to cause a huge problem within what we could laughingly call government, all the way from the people on the ground, all the way up through the command and control structure, as the various different competing interests start pulling us apart. So you'll be able to see, I think, if you want to look at it one way, the pipeline issue is going to be a wedge that's going to fracture and expose different parts of the fracturing in the government. And we'll see that sometime in February. It's going to contribute to our economic issues in the government part of it with budgets and stuff in March.
Yeah, I saw that Trump is actually asking about reopening the Keystone pipeline.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but so the other question I have about the water protectors is that their form of protests, they are committed to being peaceful. They are committed to praying for their enemies and praying for the children of both sides. So it's a very different kind of commitment and movement. Do you see that expanding?
Yeah, that's actually the ethos. So we know that there's some successful resolution on the part of that ethos because it emerges, and that's what is the powering later on of the people that going out to do the cleanup in the ocean that was been in the data for oh damn years now. You remember those sets about the people that invent stuff to go and get the plastic out and deal with radioactivity and all this kind of stuff, the ocean protector guys. And so we're dealing, see, with the emergence of that meme in the water protectors there on land, and that ethos is going to spread out. And this is generational. This is part of the same reason that we have the political shift that we have, et cetera. It's like if you will, a much larger expression of the social justice mindset that has actually grown up enough to say, okay, I'm willing to, walk the talk and put my body, I'm going to put skin in the game. And so that's kind of what we're seeing at the moment. And it's going
Yeah,
to run smack into the commercial problems, and that's some of the issues we see in the data for March.
yeah, they picked the biggest boogeyman we got pretty much to fight.
Exactly so. Yep, yep, yep.
Okay, and then Melody has a question.
Yes, Cliff, I was just wondering because you touched on it just when we thought we had to end. Can you go in a little bit more to what may be going on in Antarctica, please?
Sure. Years and years and years ago, anonymously, I got a series of photographs from a couple of different individuals that I won't say which individual got which photo to me, but I was given some photographs that showed quite clearly that what we would assume to be mountains were in fact pyramids, and that these pyramidal structures were of great size. I mean, they make the Giza complex and the plateau it is on look very small. And so the pictures I was given showed the mountains from a distance, people hiking through the snow, sort of a party of people out on an extreme expedition, and they hiked towards the mountains. And the story was that they got off their track. They were able to get these photographs. They found some just really fascinating stuff, not just the pyramids themselves, but getting into, because we're talking extreme hiker guys here that had been out hiking and were fit and everything and knew what they were doing. These guys are used to mountainous terrains. They knew what they were observing. They saw marks in the rocks. They fell into a path, so to speak, that cut as though a modern day rock climber would do it, but you could tell from the look and the types of symbols that it was not so, that it was very ancient. And so they get to this place where they see this sort of little valley, and then the photographs taken of some of the little marks, and then photographs of these people crossing the valley, and you realize as you're about halfway through the valley, and that the photos you've been shown in sequence, taken, I don't know how big the valley is, I could calculate it, never even really thought about it, but taken over the course of a long day's walk, shows that you're in fact walking towards a pyramid and not a mountain. And then by the time they get there at the late evening, and the sunset is such, the sunset is illuminating a huge, huge arched door that is perhaps 10 or 20 stories above their heads. And I don't know where they are on that pyramid relative to uh, the arch in terms of they weren't taking the photo from the bottom of the pyramid. This was taken, and maybe they climbed up into the pyramid for an hour or more. And so a huge arch that is like 90 meters high in the middle of the arch and maybe 40 meters wide at the base. And you can tell this is a doorway. It's all iced over. There's ice on everything. But anyway, so the photos quite clearly show that this is a structure that was built by intelligent beings. We don't know if we're talking men or what, and that it is encased with ice, but doesn't necessarily mean it isn't occupied or um, still viable in whatever way, whatever it was supposed to do. Now, the interesting part of this is that these guys get the photos. The fellow that tells me his tale says that he barely had chance to. I don't understand some of the stuff he was talking about because I'm not a photographer. But you have to apparently deal with film. These are old film shots that were done in the 70s or 80s, and you have to deal with film in that environment in a particular way. He had to do all of that. Had barely achieved that as they were walking back away from the pyramid when they were swept down upon by helicopters. Now they had been told, according to him, that no helicopters could come and rescue him because the conditions were such that helicopters couldn't be flying. And yet here the helicopters came in and got him and flew him out of this valley once it had been discovered that they'd strayed off of their particular path and had ended up here. And they were given a very brusque put off back to where they should have been to embark onto their boat several hours ahead of when they should have been there because they were technically going to have another day and a half to walk back from where they were. They were all planned for their particular expedition. So they were basically kicked out of Antarctica for having walked into this area. And they were smart enough not to bring up any of this. So insofar as the powers that be were concerned, I don't know that they knew that these guys had gotten to the pyramid or had in fact discovered the path that led them there as being this ancient walking um, uh, trail.
Is there any information on what spurred Kerry to go and the other leaders to go there right now?
We have weird stuff in Space Goat Farts, okay? And it's a really strange picture because what it's presenting would, I'm going to paraphrase and not go into all of the different language because I haven't interpreted it totally. But basically, it's showing us a picture of John Kerry as a prelate, as a pontiff, a pope, to a particular mindset, if you will, or a group of individuals that include some people out of the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't think the data is trying to say that he's um, a pontiff or as a religious fellow like that, but rather that he is the representative of a particular set of eyes that share a common view of the world that we might consider to be religious. And so we have that as the data sets. We just have a weird kind of a picture of the uh, religions being shaken up by the stuff coming out of there. So this adds to the confusion again that really starts building in March, and it contributes to the greater levels of confusion that are more in the global Western or Western global pop that are in August, September, and October of next year. So there's sort of whatever we get in the late February through April, we have a temporal echo that will appear sometime after August. May include part of August. I can't tell at this stage, but it's an emotional temporal echo that will include this shakeup, or I don't want to say disillusionment, but rather very much upheaval within religion that's also contributing to all the crud in March.
Well, that leads really well into the next question. Your mentioning of the Western issues. This question is, in the November report, you mentioned infighting in Europe. Is this purely about immigration and the immigrants coming in, or is there something else?
Oh, well, it's all about the money dying, okay? This is exactly the same thing as occurred in the Roman Empire when the denarius was polluted. The denarius was a silver coin and a gold coin and a copper coin, and they polluted the silver and the gold coin by adulterating the metals. And over time, that led to large population shifts. People had to work harder, et cetera, because you just were not getting paid as much as you were in the past. And that's really what's going on at this stage. We're looking at a situation where the influx of invaders into Europe is coming at an inappropriate demographic time for Europe. There may be those people that think that Europe needs an open immigration policy, as does the United States, in order to sustain the social dynamics of our social contract. That is to say, our version of pension systems require that X number of people come in to support you and so on. But right now, what we're dealing with, and what we have been dealing with since the 70s, is the outbreak of bad money. Because bad money means that you need more people in the supporting chain to support each and every one of the retirees. Um, and we have a system of the demographics working against the retirement systems as it is anyway, because there's not been, for instance, anything close to a population boom necessary to support the baby boomers as they retire in the standard course of events relative to Social Security. Same thing is true in Europe. So the socialist systems that we have that provide the safety networks operate on the idea of basically exploiting the cheap labor of the young. And if you don't produce enough young to exploit, you have to import them. And thus we have the immigration policies in North America and in Europe that favor basically the government in one way or another turning a blind eye and letting it all happen. Now, the problem in Europe is even further exacerbated because the economic system and the demographics are degrading around the bad money of money they cannot control. So these are there's this famous saying in Gaul, or Gaul is in tres part divisio. France can be divided into three parts, Caesar says. And he goes on to describe what it's like in France, which is basically the other side of the Roman Empire. They were sort of like Mexico is to the United States. And so he was saying that, oh, you can divide Gaul up into these three chunks. And he divided them based on how far out the Roman money spread into what was France. And so we could do that same thing. And we can say, okay, those countries that are furthest away from the dollar are going to have their problems earliest. And turns out that those countries that are furthest away from the dollar are down in South America. And now we know that Egypt is further out than India, but Hungary was further out than either of those. And Uzbekistan was further out than either of those as well. But now India is further out from the dollar than every place else, and it's having its problems. Well, in this next year, Europe is going to be furthest out from the dollar, and they're going to start showing the problems very much the same way that France, as an economic, even though although it was barter and what the Romans considered barbarian, it was an economic state that failed, that caused the Gaulish peoples to try and emigrate to where there was work, where there was money. And that's basically why they went into Rome. And they had a further pressure in that the Huns, the German population, was even further away from the center of the denarius, and they had been most recently conquered, so they were the most recently pissed off, and they were putting pressure on the Gauls to move in there. And this is exactly what's happening now. As the dollar rots, it's rotting from the outside, moving in. So the next up to face the kind of stuff going on in India, as we've seen in the language always precedes the acts, and they're talking about it now. It'll be a cash run in Europe. And when that happens, all of these immigrants with or invaders, however you want to think of them, with no support system, no family to feed them, all of this kind of stuff, and the social internet infrastructure of the European society breaking down, we're going to see pop war break out like you wouldn't believe, because it's going to be a fight for survival.
Okay, well, that lends to Alan Moore's question, which is basically, he says the last time the Muslims were driven out of Europe was the Crusades. Well, I'd have
No,
to
no, it's
question that when I
yeah.
know that I'm a historian. That is not my question, but I'm reading it for him. Okay, but leaving that aside, Alan says this time, will they be driven out by the locals or by benefits being running out? Can they adapt to Western culture, or will they force Europe to adapt to their culture again? I think it's probably a bit more complex than that, but what do you think?
There's a biological component that it needs to be addressed. Okay, again, this sounds harsh, but we have to deal with this kind of stuff. So the fact of the matter is that when we had the height of the Muslim invasion of Europe in the past, we had the most advanced civilization on the planet that had conquered a bunch of barbarians, and they extended their conquering so far as to control Spain and a lot of southern Europe. And in Spain, they had running water, they had gaslight at night, they had cooling houses that made ice for the summer, and this was all brought in by the Muslim population. So we were talking of very advanced peoples. They were beaten out by the sheer numbers and were overbred, and there was the solar problems that caused the northern populations to put pressure on the southern populations of Europe, that eventually drove, because of food sources, that eventually drove the Muslims out of Europe. And then it became the Crusades afterwards, when the rich in Europe decided, oh, hey, we're winning. We're geniuses. Let's keep on with this. And in fact, they were simply riding a demographic wave. Now, what's going to happen this time cannot happen as an echo of that. For a couple of different reasons. We'd never ever repeat the past, and rhymes are only faint anyway because of things that are occurring now relative to the complexity of the pulse. But here's what's going to occur. We're now reaching our 52nd or third generation of religiously enhanced, augmented inbreeding in Muslim populations. Okay, so at the time that we have Cadiz with gaslight and engineering for new bridges and so forth from the Muslim population, we had a Muslim population that was barely out 8 or 9 generations into Muhammad's edict that says it's okay and, in fact, preferable to marry your first cousin. He says it's preferable to marry your first cousin because it has a tendency to concentrate wealth in the families, and it's put in the Quran because of the economic issues that were besetting Islam at the time that it started. And so they needed to do everything they could not to be bled dry. And so a lot of the language in the Quran is all about money. And so in this instance, we now have had the impact of that, where we've had 50 plus generations of inbreeding to the point where invaders or immigrants in Denmark took the population of children with special needs from a relatively small number in the single digits. And now in some school districts, it's over 53% of the population of the children. And that's been averaged out by the existing population that was there. So the numbers are staggering. Before the immigrants were allowed X amount of mental services required in school system within 2 months of immigrants being allowed in Denmark, a 353% increase in the demand for those services, and X amount not being met because they were totally swamped. So we're now dealing with a population that, like I said, this is harsh, but it's the result of inbreeding. If you continuously produce humans or any population bred to first cousins, you will produce a population that is aggressive, short-tempered, short attention span, intellectually deficient in many different ways, and we see this playing out in reality. And I like looking at reality, however harsh it is, because at some point I'll be dead and I won't be able to, and I'll have to take all these images with me to sort them all out. But when we look at reality, we find, in fact, there are more books written in small hamlets in Germany than in all of Islam. There's more books translated out of one particular small company that does translations in Romania than in all of the Islamic states. And it has to do with what's been going on. And this is not new. I mean, this has been going on for generations, but it's a tipping of what used to be. Look at how much of our language we owe to Islam and how much of it is all focused on science. Algebra, algebra. It's all of these kind of words, alcohol, all of these come from the Arabic. And so much of our language in the science realm and math world comes from the Arabic. But you don't see that today. You don't see the math geniuses arising from that population. And I suggest that under current situation, as long as that breeding trend is enforced by the religion, you won't see those populations producing such geniuses. So at this particular moment, the odds don't favor the immigrants being able to pull off a successful settlement when faced with a crumbling currency that's going to make the local populace desperate to stay alive and not able to deal with competition. In spite of age differences, in spite of the aging population and so on, the data sets seem to suggest that we're going to see something that would be akin to the 1800s, in which the Muslim population was forced out in what we'll have to just at this point call ethnic cleansing.
I was going to ask about that because my husband has a PhD essentially in the European migration age through the Norse, and he has noticed that what seems to be happening now is almost a reverse of when people from the north moved in. What you were describing, it's much more complicated than just people moving, but when the Roman Empire was ending and people were coming north to south because of a whole lot of things like the weather changing, which it really did, and land washing away and currency and everything. And now he said it's very hard to stop a mass folk migration when people just start moving. And that's been my concern, is how do you stop people from coming? Because the Mediterranean's there and people just get on boats.
Right, exactly. Well, lots of them drowned, and then there's of course the way it's going to stop actually is going to be by in terms of the data, is going to be pretty much the same thing that occurred when the yellow hordes, Genghis Khan, invaded Europe due to the same kind of migratory pressures, that is to say, climate and the failure of the local economy to support the populations. And so Temujin led them into Europe, and then they met sufficient enough resistance that the column was stopped, and then they sort of settled where they were at, and declared it sort of a status quo. So we may see that indeed there's a caliphate that arises out of the bumbling of the Council on Foreign Relations and these guys' control of the Middle East. Maybe they really screwed it up and we actually get them all to solidify and we get a caliphate that emerges from there. The new boundaries of that caliphatic state with Europe may include small parts of Italy. It may include parts of Spain the way it has in the past. It may reach over into northern Africa. These things have yet to be determined, as the populations are going to have to sort this out, as fundamentally what's going to drive them is going to be at this stage actually just those things that you bring up: weather and the failure of currency, which goes to the ability of the individuals to survive.
Thank you. That was very insightful.
It's sad, yeah. That it'd be nice if that weren't the way, but of course we read Thinking in Destiny, and so there's obviously the necessity that many of these individuals face these challenges.
Yeah, it is, and living here, it's painful to watch. It really is.
Yeah,
Um,
especially when you get, back in your head and you say, well, damn it, you can cure a lot of things, but not stupidity, not lack of vision.
yeah. I think we have another question, don't we?
Sure.
I know I'm asking because I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused on my list here. Sybil is are you up next?
Okay, I think it's me. I don't
Oh, you're
know,
Amrath.
but let
Okay.
me roll. Yeah, yeah. Cliff, the next question is a quintessentially human question and touches on what you've just been speaking about. Okay? And it's like, what is an ordinary human to be, a ordinary to do and to be? Um, like, we're quintessentially human. And what we see economically around us is that the grey economies are bringing their way to the surface. Like the example that I have in front of me is the illegal marijuana farming in Oregon is now legal and it's revitalizing communities. What is our new vision to be as humanity? And I'm not talking individually because our individual karma is our individual karma. But what do we vision to? Do we vision to small communities? Do we vision to small business? Where do we vision to bring ourselves to through this, the very big changes that we're dealing with?
I think you're quite correct. We do exactly that. We vision too small. Voltaire said, in times of great trouble, the thing to do is to tend to your own garden. And I think that that's exactly what saves our ass, by the way. I won't get into the details because I'm still writing at those. But this is a really prescient kind of a question because we're at a cusp of, if we look at the fourth turning in a particular way, it's the expression of the universe deciding, okay, we've gone down that road enough, let's go down this road. And so the Taoists said that, when things are at their most extreme, they've already changed. The impetus, the trend has already shifted by the time you recognize that things are at their most extreme. And so we are going back to a smaller, more local focus, and that's actually what saves us all in the end. Not, and there is no end, but I mean down the road, simply because what we're living through is the breakup of what Catherine Austin Fitts calls the inhuman vision for America or for the world, the Western planet, where we're all cube farmed. We live in, yuppie farms where we're yuppie housing farms where we're all in little cookie cutter houses, all of this kind of thing. And this world has been ongoing for a number of years. It has emerged or been flavored by the emergence of a lot of the technology from the reverse engineering of the spaceships in the 40s. And that technology was towards a very inhuman understanding of reality. The inhumanness that is expressed in an assembly line is not the kind of thing we're talking about. That sort of slavery, labor slavery, is not what we're talking about when we say an inhuman society or civilization model. And rather, we're talking about something that goes even further, and that really is the digitization of everything, the control of everything via machine um, categorization, to where you don't make decisions unless it's within the categories that the machine says you're allowed to make those decisions. This is an inhuman model for how things work. It does lead to the idea of vast efficiencies, where you aggregate all of these things into large control structures and you get very large efficiencies. But of course, they're very fragile, and that's something we just don't talk about frequently. Is that large monoculture, the minute that Roundup fails due to changing circumstances in reality manifesting here on Earth, all of Monsanto is toast because their structure is entirely set up for a paradigm that must persist infinitely in order for it to work. And it won't persist even marginally infinitely. And so we know it's going to fail, and actually it's going to fail fairly quickly. And that is part of the things that are the impetus to putting us back to small scale everything. Now, the really good news on this is that the best example we have of small scale focus and thinking was the most successful one on the planet. And unfortunately, it was destroyed by big machine warfare, but it was the pre Bolshevik Revolution model for agribusiness that existed throughout what we came to call the Soviet Union. But at that point, we would have called Greater Russia because Russia was indeed in the 1900s, early 1900s. It was extending all the way over into Siberia at that point. And this agriculture model extended all the way with it. And it was just fantastically effective. And it'll probably be something close to that that we end up emulating in terms of our production. So I think that's how you do it. That's how you come through it all. Now, of course, you can take it all the way down through the uh, jump into it, dive in even deeper, and think to yourself, okay, focus on the small and take it all the way down into focusing on changing myself, giving myself the support and the tools I need get to get through very chaotic times. And so if you're particularly prone to a type of a reaction in chaos, you recognize that and you take appropriate steps to deal with that so that that reaction of your own does not alter or color or inform your necessary decisions in the hard times ahead. Because as we say hard, what we really need to understand is there's a context to this hardness that needs to be understood for all of the kids out there that are just going to be hearing this and starting to wake up a bit. And that is that this hardness means that you will be faced with challenges and you'll be having to make decisions and react to those challenges. And in many cases, you won't be able to compensate or to recover from a bad choice. So that's what's hard. You make a decision, you roll the dice, and you can't recover from that decision. And it puts you into an even worse situation. And so that's the harshness, the nature of reality that's been hidden by the schooling system in much of the Western world for this past couple of generations. And that's what these kids are going to have to deal with as we go forward. The good news about it, though, is that a focus even down to an individual level, even concentrating on yourself amidst the chaos of everything that's going on around you, is an effective strategy because you can give yourself meditative techniques, physical techniques to keep you out of the entrainment of other people, make your mind strong, your body strong. And like I've been saying since probably 2003, get strong to go long.
And drink good water.
Yes, indeed. Yes, yes. As
Yeah,
bags of
yeah,
mostly water, we need to have a lot of it in us. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And all of that we need to do, perhaps despite the laws or
That's the
despite
issue.
the government.
Yeah, see, there's the thing, I mean, I personally have been in that state where actions of mine were that I took on a basis for, 20 plus years were illegal at the time that I was taking them in the country I was doing it. So under those circumstances,
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing, but I was well aware of the risk that I was taking, and I did so um, in an aware fashion, knowing the consequences that would happen. And I was also actively working to change those states so it would not be illegal anymore. But I think you'll find that a lot of the stuff that is now on the books and this sort of thing for laws is just going to fade away. We just won't be able to afford them anymore as we get into this period of the dollar dying. It's really a strange phenomenon, but if you go and look, you see that in the time of the currency swap in France, the amount of legislative activity and all of this kind of stuff just dropped down to nothing, as we now see with what's going on in Spain. Spain is having a dollar crisis that has basically rendered them without a federal government, and they have not been out producing all kinds of laws and crap. So we're going to be getting back to that situation here in the United States where the federal government uh, won't be able to afford to pay people to sit around and bitch and moan and fight about stuff that's not important.
Okay, that's the good news. Right? That's the good
I
news.
think that's good
Okay,
news.
and with
Yeah.
that, yeah, over to Sibel.
I'm going to have to take off, guys. We're going to have to break off now, I'm afraid.
And your perfect timing. That was our last question.
Oh, well,
Thank
good
you.
deal then.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your time. And we'll be putting this up on YouTube and pass it over to you. And for listeners, you can get his reports on halfpasthuman.com. And if you want to talk to other folks that read his reports, you can go to the webbotforum.com as well. So thank you for your time, Cliff.
Thank you very much, guys. It was fun.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.